Let's start with questions. When you hear the words Bitcoin education, what comes to your mind? Is it the Bitcoin standard, the white paper? Is it a podcast? Is it a long Twitter thread? And maybe more importantly, when you think or when you imagine a Bitcoin educator, who do you picture? Is it Saifedean? Is it a YouTuber? Is it a developer? Um, who is it? We often say that Bitcoin education has the power to change the world. But does it really? And if it does, who is writing that story? My name is Reyna. I'm the Director of Education at My First Bitcoin, a nonprofit that started in El Salvador and now reaches educators, students, and communities in over 35 countries. But I didn't start as a director. I started as an educator, though not by professional training. I was invited to travel to Panajachel, this beautiful lakeside town in Guatemala, back in 2023. And I was not a teacher by profession. I was just trusted to go because I went through the program. And they sent me, I put my heart into this opportunity. And when I got there, the only request that they thought was they wanted a female educator. And at first, we didn't understand why. But when I got there, it made sense because in this predominantly Mayan community, although a lot of the merchants and a lot of the businesses that accept Bitcoin payments were women, the conversations about money were still led by men. So it did help me, being a woman, to engage with them and talk about money and talk about Bitcoin. I also assumed that because quite a few businesses were already accepting Bitcoin, it was going to be very easy to start teaching. But I quickly realized that sometimes adoption doesn't really equal curiosity. A lot of the people was just taking the payments and instantly converting to fiat and moving on. So we started from zero. We continue our work. I remember that the first class that I held it was the shared space on my patio, was basically a no-show. And also the second one and the third one. And so we went to schools, we knocked doors, and we also teach the teachers first because they wanted to see what happened. They wanted to see what the students were going to receive. And then what happened is that in that class, built basically on trust, ignoring tech, I realized that there is something deeper, that when you share Bitcoin education, you are also representing values, and that has to be done with care. So I came back to El Salvador. I went back to El Salvador. I was on fire, and I was like, you guys are right. This is how we're going to change the world. And I later became a lead teacher and then director of education. And you will think that it was going to look like this. And I also thought that it was going to look like that, personally. And that eventually we're just going to get to that, right? How many of you saw that photo? And it was still incredibly rewarding, but not really how it looks like in Twitter all the time. That was the reality. That's still some of the reality sometimes. And as we kept growing, something started to feel off. We were invited to bigger stages. We were also invited, government entities were taking interested. We were invited also by Minister of Education. They asked for our support to develop their own programs. And companies also with big budgets that once promised to help, they just went on and did their own curriculums and with a lot of the ideas that we shared, which it was a little bit encouraging as well because they went on and did them themselves. Although a lot of the curriculum was basically closed, so no open to public, no open to be able to contribute. And that's when I felt that Bitcoin education started to feel like the new PR strategy. It started to feel like the new headlines and also, the message to say, we're also doing education, look at us. But a lot of the message underneath that, it was only, we do it right, we know what we're doing, and you shouldn't question it. So the students became metrics, became like photo ops, headliners, and Bitcoin was still in the picture, sure, but the message was being lost. And I realized that when Bitcoin education stops being about understanding and it starts being about ownership, we basically already lost the plot. That's when I realized there is an invisible battle happening in Bitcoin education, and it's not about access, it's about control. And specifically, it is the control of the narrative. And when I say control of the narrative, I don't mean headline PRs. I mean who decides what gets taught, what parts of Bitcoin are being spotlighted, and what are others being quietly left out. The way we teach, it shapes how people see it. Is that a slow drift from Bitcoin as a tool for empowerment to a tool of branding, influence, and sometimes even compliance. Bitcoin is neutral, but Bitcoin education never. It's always a story, and someone is always writing that story, whether we like it or not, and whether we realize it or not. So I come from El Salvador, and for a time we were celebrated as the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. It felt like a breakthrough, finally a country embracing innovation, inclusion, and innovation as well. But this year, that story changed. As part of the $1.4 billion deal with the IMF, El Salvador had to check and basically reframe unwind its Bitcoin framework. Since April 30th this year, Bitcoin is no longer legal tender in El Salvador. Merchants are not legally required to accept Bitcoin anymore, and taxes have to be paid in the US again. The whole agreement is public. You can go ahead and watch it. So just like that, the narrative changed, again, quietly. And we remember how the Bitcoin law came into effect. It was with big announcements, big headlines, and this time was quite a reversal. And when we questioned, we were told just trust and wait. And I'm not here to debate politics. I'm basically here to make sure that we ask what happens when Bitcoin education, it starts written by institutions and not by its users. What happened with Bitcoin education is no longer designed to empower, but to comply. And this isn't just in El Salvador. We know that in Venezuela, people went into Bitcoin trying to survive out of inflation, while the government, it was also just promoting their own coin, the petro. In Brazil, a lot of the Bitcoin education programs are linked to fintech and government programs, which is not always bad, but if we don't ask questions, we risk quiet capture. And also in China, we don't even need to imagine what narrative control looks like. The government controls the money and the curriculum. That's not education, that's just compliance. Because control of the narrative does not always look like censorship. It also can look like a sponsorship. It can look like a curriculum with no authors and applause to a story that we didn't get to write. Throughout history, education has always been one of the first tools of control. If you are able to shape how people think, then you are able to shape what they will accept. And that's why open source education matters. Open source education, it's not a luxury. Open source Bitcoin education is not a luxury. It's not a charity. It's not something that we can do when we have funds. It's not PR. It's basically resistance. This is how we're going to resist, and we fight for truth in a world full of quiet control. Now, let me pause here quickly. At my first Bitcoin, we removed the names from our curriculum, but not to hide, to invite. We believe that no one owns Bitcoin, so no one owns Bitcoin education either. And we removed the names not to erase the contributors, but to honor the idea that this is a collective effort and something that needs to be improved, mixed, and shared. There is a difference between a curriculum with no authors and a curriculum with no accountability. The way we want one that always says, this belongs to all of us. But let's be honest, Bitcoin education is getting attention from governments, from platforms, from companies, which is not always bad. Many of them come with very good intentions, But if we don't pause and ask why, we might miss that sort of shift that keeps happening in our world, from empowerment to influence, from learning to alignment, and from sovereignty to a strategy. And what I mean by that, exchanges and custodial platforms often lead the conversation around Bitcoin literacy. They offer resources, courses, tutorials, but sometimes Bitcoin education becomes less about financial empowerment and is a little bit more about customer acquisition. Large mining companies also are increasingly entering the education space. They are funding projects, they're funding initiatives, they talk about sustainability. And mining, we know it can be a force for good, but especially when it supports local communities. But when a few players grow too powerful, the narrative can shift again, quietly and then suddenly. And then, of course, governments and institutions, they see Bitcoin as a new, try to be up here modern, is the new improvement for innovation. Because when governments enter the Bitcoin education space, that's when education and neutrality becomes even more important. Because no government is neutral, and let me tell you, I've learned about that. We also have the edtechs and online platforms. These days, they see the demand. They want to scale the business. They offer credentials. But if the future of Bitcoin education is paywalled, what happens when the incentive to teach is going to be tied to the incentive to sell? And this is not about fear. This is not resistant to growth. It's about awareness. Because once again, control of the narrative doesn't always look like censorship. Sometimes it's just like a polished dashboard, a press release, a certificate. So you will think, okay, what does real education look like then? What Bitcoin education look like? And I believe it can look like this. A curriculum open that anyone can read, anyone can use, anyone can improve. It's not because it's free, not because it's worthless. It's free because it's priceless. It's alive, it's imperfect, it's transparent. It's taught in classrooms, and parks, and communities, and coffee shops where everybody can gather. And most importantly, everybody is free to build on top of that, to adapt it, to make it better, to create tools that might, just might, us and the generations to come, set us free. And at my first Bitcoin, we've seen this work. And I can tell you a little bit about some stories. A teacher in El Salvador that received a Bitcoin diploma, and 1 year later, he went back to his high school and teaches all teachers the program. Also, volunteers across the globe translating the curriculum in Swahili, in Portuguese, in French, and many more, not because we asked, but because they saw the value and they just took action. And then we also have Felix, the incredible founder of the core in Africa, in Kenya. In October 2023, he launched his first cohort. And the most recent that he had a month ago, it was 138 graduates. By June 2025, he's done 6 more cohorts. But the magic on that is that 10 Bitcoin education programs were born from it. In India, in Haiti, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Afghanistan. No marketing, no mandates, just people who learned, who believed, and who decided to build. And that's what real Bitcoin education to me looks like. We have many stories like this from India, from Kenya to Indonesia, to Peru, to Haiti. There is people that is taking the curriculum, the resources, turning it into something powerful. And to me, that's how a decentralized model works. I believe that that's what the network effects should feel like it. And because when we build something open, people do show up. And not a brand, not a campaign. We see this as a movement. And I don't stand here saying that we have it all figured out. We've made mistakes. At Mi Primer Bitcoin, we trust in the ground partners. We've been very slow sometimes to say no. We've stretched too thin, trying to meet the demand. And yeah, there were moments when I asked, are we becoming what we said that we would never be? But we've also learned what it works. And what it works is clarity. knowing who you are, knowing why you stay independent, knowing why you stay Bitcoin only. What works is openness, publishing our work, inviting feedback, letting others to lead, letting go of ego. What works is community. Community, not competing, but collaborating across continents. Most of all, what believes is staying humble, staying true. We don't need to be perfect, we just need to be honest, because if we learn from each other's mistakes and we build with integrity, this movement is not just going to grow, it's going to grow stronger. If we want Bitcoin education to stay free, we must keep it free, free as in speech, free as in sovereignty, free as in truth. We don't need a story written by the powerful. We need a story written by those who choose freedom. And I believe that Bitcoin education is how we are going to write it together. Thank you.
Secure your BTC Prague 2026 ticket at the lowest possible price now.